The aim of this series of instructional videos is to show how Lacan's thinking depends on a special kind of visualization that we would call topology if we were mathematicians, or inside-outness if we were not. Lacan coined a word for inside-outness, extimity or extimacy in the English form, but as easy as it is to talk about reversible gloves and upside-down flower vases, Lacanians in general have not picked up on this option to talk about topology as non-mathematical. Let's try another way to encourage talk about extimacy, as inversion, and in particular, let's look at what is called the induction puzzle, where the answer is embedded inside the question. The reason for doing this is that examples are easy to find, even if we don't always have the right words to describe them. Take this case of a view down an imaginary tunnel drawn by the architect Étienne-Louis Boullé, who was fond of spheres that turned inside-outside. The light at the end of the tunnel begins as a bright void, but can be inverted into a bright sphere against the dark sky. Simply by inverting the figure-ground relation, we can imagine a hole in space, which is how Boullé begins, as a solid standing out in front of a space, with space behind it, which is where Boullé wants to end. We can invert this image to see more details of how the pyramid of light plays into it, also inverting into a solid. The point is that all this happens in our brain and eyes, but appears to happen out there in the external world. We are thinking-speaking beings who are hell-bent to create inversions inside our heads that we then want to see and resolve in outside reality. The fact that artists throughout the ages have picked up on inversion is another clue. Although it's difficult to explain what goes on when figure-ground relations flip, or space turns inside out, it is easy to show it, and artists are good at that. James Turrell devised this amusing installation, which is now on display at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh. You see what looks like to be a blue rectangle suspended in front of a white wall behind it. But actually, it's a hole in the white wall, lit to look like a solid shape in front. Turrell chose to reference a Greek myth about suppressing a prophecy that ends up in making the prophecy come true, which is perhaps the most ancient famous form of what's called an induction puzzle. So we know that Turrell is trying to put us on the right track. Inversion leads to induction, and this leads to a topological truth. We are wired for inversion, and we might explain it as nothing more than neurons doing what neurons want to do. But artists are forever noting that we attach ideas to this neural process. So they make great use of the way that we use figure-ground, inside-out relations to talk about beauty and ugliness, desire and repulsion, refusal and admission. Stare at the cross in the middle of this image of a pig-faced woman long enough, and when it suddenly disappears, you have an attractive face that is branded onto your retina. The after image shows how we have inversion built into our perception, how we think by resisting, defending ourselves against the sensation that bombard us, creating opposites out of oppositions, and then thinking that they are universal values. Artists show that this natural tendency to create oppositions holds a more important secret, that the ugly is not just a part of the beautiful, it is a condition for knowing it, a kind of no pain, no gain approach to human thought. The image known as the Sheila Nagig, a female figure in a provocative gesture, demands attention that repels us, But if we hold our noses, so to speak, we are shown the other side of ugliness, which is beauty. This is like an initiation experience, punishment before reward, and sculptural examples of the Sheela na gig are found all over northwestern Europe, the UK and Ireland, and its meaning and popularity was picked up by Picasso in his African-style painting of the Dryad. What appears first to be simply a bit of ancient porno copied by some modern artist turns out to be unexpectedly complex. Picasso's famous 1907 painting, The Demoiselle d'Avignon, opens onto a room with two prostitutes and a seated figure. It is guarded by two figures holding open curtains, one facing an inside space of the audience, the other holding back the sky, which opens like a curtain onto a cosmos beyond. The initiation of theme is a formula for protecting something with an interlocking crisscross kind of gateway. Knowledge is not just about learning. It is akin to being stopped, being given a puzzle, and then being admitted if we guess the right answer. Spatial passage and revelation are one and the same. Given the two characters who are holding curtains, one to the cosmic space outside, the other to the audience's interior space in front of the painting, there is an overlap that is both logical and spatial. The doubling of the Sheela na gig correlates to the inside observer, seated in the classic pose of melancholy, head on hand, who from the inside the two frames has the function as a kind of Janusian observer. Like the god Janus, he must turn from one side of the space to the other, one Sheela to the other. This 180-degree turn from front to back is also what joins the circuit of the frame of the image. But from the inside, this is both an outside to inside and inside to outside. So the 360 degrees becomes 720 degrees. Mozart puts the Sheela na gig into his opera, The Magic Flute, where the bird-catcher Papageno is promised a bride, but given what first appears to be an ugly girl in shabby clothes, who demands to be accepted anyway. He does, and then she takes off her disguise, revealing that all along she was an incredibly beautiful woman, Papagena, and that he will have life everlasting thanks to their many children. If Boulez, Turel, Picasso, and Mozart are all right about induction and inversion, we should try to make sense of it theoretically. My proposal is to use the simplest possible way to symbolize a distinction that flips around between two positions, making the inside and outside, and vice versa. You can think of this any way you like, inside-outside, high and low, front and back. The point is to show that distinction that is so confident in dividing things comes back on itself and gets involved in a reversal that creates a symmetry, where we must suffer in order to learn the truth. This idea of insulation as initiation is not abstract. It is built into our neurons. It is hardwired. The afterimage lets us prove to ourselves that we are destined to find what we most value in the cracks, holes, crevices, flips, and breaks of life. And artists make the most of this by showing how beauty lies in ugliness, pleasure in pain, and desire in fright. It's not abstract. It's the way we are built. This catch-as-catch-can principle attracts artists of every era, culture, and proclivity to make some gesture towards inversion and the induction puzzle, where the answer is contained in the question. The flip that produces a void means that anything that happens inside it must be self-canceling. The void cannot be filled. whatever falls into it cannot be saved. It has to be shown its mirror image and self-annihilated. Our way of showing this uses the notation system developed by the British mathematician George Spencer Brown, where the flip distinction is shown with a little bracket. Something inside it can be cancelled by what is outside it, but it means that we can cram as many self-canceling pairs inside the main flip as we like, as long as they are symmetrical and opposite. It would be very boring to show the pairs immediately annihilating themselves as soon as they appear. So artists use a technique of scrambling that is easy to show using our bracket notation. Each state, inside or outside, can move independently and associate itself with another opposite state as long as the oppositions are maintained. Think of this as a way that stories overlap and combine in a drama. Perhaps the most complex example of this shuffling technique is James Joyce's novel Finnegan's Wake, where the idea of beginning again is built into the title. The French word for end, fin, happens over and over. The goalposts on this field of play are set up by a single sentence split in two, the last part presented first, the first part last. So we know we are in the hands of a master of inversion who is going to fill the middle with a series of induction puzzles. If inversion and induction are the way that art tunes into the human neural network and gets us to do the work of opening up the cut of distinction, we need a way to theorize it. This begins by realizing the difference between a stack and a circuit. This is critical because the stack just keeps on stacking. It goes on to infinity without any way of coming to a conclusion. In other words, it's all questions, no answers. All ugly hags, no beautiful women. A circuit circulates. It shows how an inside and outside are necessary to each other, how beauty necessarily starts out in ugliness. We like to know that there is some end to things, but we don't want any cheap and easy solutions. We want to see beauty emerge from ugliness, inside to emerge from outside, answers to emerge from puzzles. So we look for order that emerges from disorder, a pile that holds itself together and emerges out of a simple stack. Most of you will be familiar with the Borromeo knot, and even with Lacan's use of it to designate the relations between the three domains of the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary. Right away, you can tell that there's something funny about these three rings. They are not directly linked together. They sit on top of each other, but we can't tell which is top, which is bottom, or which is middle. For example, the red is on top of the green, but beneath the blue. But the blue is beneath the green. Each ring is on top of one ring and on the bottom of another, creating a kind of connected spiral. Yet the knot holds together. Although the bond is fluid, it works like a solid. Lacan has three things that, if we stack them up, become a human being. These are the imaginary, that is, what we experience through our senses, the symbolic, our language, and the real, the stuff that happens to us from the outside and comes in the form of uncontrollable, indescribable trauma. But this is an organic whole, not a random collection. We have to see an order that creates a circuit that resists being shut down. We need to see these rings holding themselves together, not simply loosely one on top of the other. There would be no cohesiveness, no logical necessity. We don't want to link the rings directly, because each domain has its own independent concerns. What we need is a kind of viscosity, a stickiness. the rings must find a relation that is flexible, not forced, where the order of the whole is the key to the meaning of the parts. We can use our notation system to symbolize this dynamic stability, a kind of destabilizing stability, by showing how any ring on the top of the stack is simultaneously on the bottom, beginning again. Finnegan. In addition to finding a way to make a graphical, logical picture of what happens with the Borromeo knot, we need some situation in popular culture where the story uses this same shaping mechanism to create a circuit out of the pile of things that happen one after the other. In the 1951 sci-fi thriller The Day the Earth Stood Still, we find the perfect analogy for how the viscosity of the Borromeo rings, where the top tucks under the bottom, works at the level of the detail. Earth in the 1950s was about to blow itself up with atomic bombs, so the fear was that so many nuclear explosions would set off a gigantic chain reaction. The film tells the story of how the Federation of Galaxies, with much more advanced life forms, decides to present the warring parties of Earth with an ultimatum: reform, or we will destroy you to protect ourselves from your stupidity. To do this, they use inversion geometry and the induction puzzle. All of the star power of the galaxies are concentrated on the spaceship that lands on the Capitol Mall in Washington, D.C. Outside focuses on an inside point. From this inside, Klaatu, the only live occupant of the spaceship, is able to slip in and out. His robot, Gort, protects the ship with his powerful space laser I-beam. We could call this inversive measure, with a Lacanian name, agency, to say how Klaatu proposes to heal the war-torn Earth. Part of the answer belongs to the puzzle. Klaatu's warning that the Galactic Federation will destroy Earth if they don't reform is inverted. The army shoots and kills Klaatu. However, Gort revives him, and he escapes with his Earth girlfriend and her son to a better life on a faraway galaxy, leaving behind a force of little Gorts to maintain law and order as best they can. Gort's space laser I-beam tells the story of how inversion works. It is the power of the stars lying in the space around Earth that can, Borromeo-like, be relocated to the center. The sphere at infinity becomes the point at the middle. This popular culture example of Lacan's extimacy turns out to be, in our terms, extromission, the power of the eye to radiate and not just accept incoming light. The double circuit is also present as a result of this inversion. Not only can Gort see things with a perfect peripheral vision, 180 degrees to 360, he can radiate a corrective I-beam in another perfect circuit, adding up to 720 degrees. This added circuit corrects what it sees. It destroys only the weapons of aggression. It melts guns, but leaves the nice soldiers unharmed. This is like punishing a crime as soon as it happens, no space in between. It is a simultaneity that, like the cancellation process of paired elements inside the void, roots out the free radicals wherever they have gone to hide by pairing them with oddly matched others. This silly little sci-fi film has taught us how to think about the stack of the RSI domains, how to conceptualize the viscosity that keeps the rings stuck together. The stack allows things to move freely, but the logic of the cut makes sure that the ideal original order will never be forgotten. The system itself will have a perfect memory, a kind of peripraxis, where things will be held in place perfectly forever, thanks to the fact that they were lost in the first place. It's time to close this session on inversion and induction, and to get ready for the next lesson, which takes us further into the logic of the stack that, by not nailing itself down, has an even more absolute order. This is like finding the solution of how free will is related to determinism, but without making this a theological issue. Many powerful thinkers have also made the case for why chance is the key to necessity. We'll talk about this in terms that Lacan and Freud used: parapraxis, metaphor and metonymy, symmetrical difference, and instrumental convergence. If we can avoid using too many terms, we can stick to the program set out by inversion and induction. This will be our challenge, to find an economical logic that is portable, adaptable, and usable by anyone for anything. Like this clip from Charlie Chaplin's film The Circus, it's about the circle that refuses to be a circle, which in 3D terms is space that refuses to be space. If we can fold space, we can, as Chaplin tells us by checking his watch, fold time. And if we can fold time, we can think of retroaction, a key element so near and dear to both Freud and Lacan as the atom. So for next time, think about this one simple diagram. It is how speech, which depends on temporal sequence, folds over on itself, creating two gaps. If we use Leon Brenner's example of retroaction, a simple sentence has multiple meanings whenever a new word is given emphasis. It's not just the word that changes, it's the words around it. This is called a lipogram. It's a void in the middle of things that radiates a force field around it. But that same force field converges back on the original point, the cut or hole made by this reverse action movement. Lacan points out that this potential to reshape meaning through the voice is a kind of 0 degree of the signifier, the place where the signifier acquires its metaphoric superpowers. Next time, we will use a historically significant idea, that of the pile. You've heard about this from Slavoj Žižek, but he never gives us the proper name. It's called the sorites, the paradox of how a pile becomes a pile, which is the point where we recognize a pile and then start subtracting grains of sand or whatever to try to find the point, which was always just before the point of realization, where the pile had become a pile. This, of course, is the perfect place to study the logic of retroaction, this point just before. The sorites is a paradox, because we keep subtracting grains of sand until we get to the absurd point of having to say that the pile begins with the first grain of sand. Of course, this sounds ridiculous, but here's the secret. One grain of sand anticipates the pile, but only as something that is realized retroactively. The one involves the 0, since it is the only thing that is less than the 1, the non-1. It's a retroaction that makes the single grain into an almost pile, and the future, when time will fold over on itself, that makes the 0 part of the 1. Lacan has actually already thought about this, which is the joy of working with someone who is very intelligent, but doesn't spill the beans and keep us from having the fun of thinking through important problems. Lacan himself is a puzzle structure. His answers are in his questions, so when we study inversion and induction, we are talking about the way we study Lacan in a forward motion, not always stopping our thinking to ask where it comes from. It comes from itself. It comes from the puzzle Lacan presents in relation to the subject and the signifier. The subject who is 1, and the signifier that zeroes out every time it joins the suppression of the metaphor with the extension of metonymy. Next time we'll consider agency in terms of the effectiveness of accumulation and emergence, hiding something, then finding it. We'll use Spencer-Brown's calculus symbols to diagram this in a way that shows off the rule of inversion and induction, so that sorites won't appear to be so complicated. Further, we'll see the question of meaning in terms of a combination of metaphor, which is the act of concealing one signifier within or behind another, and metonymy, which is the creation of the haystack where there is a needle to find. Don't let all these new terms scare you. The needle is easier to find than you might think. It's what makes a haystack into a pile, and the pile into an induction puzzle. This makes it possible to rethink the positions of Freud and Lacan from the point of view of effectiveness, which we can now see in terms of accumulation, sorites, and the original cut that allows the viewer to take up a position in the middle void, where there is something marvelous called symmetrical difference.